white prison doctor slaps a prayer book off a black janitor's cart. The crash startles a dying patient. The monitor trembles, laughter from the doorway. Then silence. The janitor steadies a loose line, bows his head, whispers a prayer. A single beep returns, steady, strong. What happened next silenced everyone. The prison hospital ward was the color of watered milk, steel, flaking paint, the hum of lights that never slept. Cameras blinked red in the corners like tired eyes. A row of beds held men in state-issue blankets who had learned to lie perfectly still. Breathing machines hissed and settled. Far down the tier, a radio behind glass tried to catch a song and kept losing it. It started with a joke. "Make way for the chaplain with the mop," said the white doctor, walking fast, white coat opening and closing like a flag in bad weather. He was known for speed, the kind that looked like competence from a distance. Up close, it felt like wind. He swept past a nurse, past two correctional officers with clipboards, then pivoted on the rubber toe of his shoe and stared at the black janitor by the last bed. The janitor had paused beside a dying man, an old inmate whose wrists were bracelets of blue veins and whose breath traveled like a traveler with too much road behind him. The janitor had placed one palm on the rail, the other on the handle of his cart. His head was bowed. The prayer, if that's what it was small, the size of a thought. "Hey," the doctor said, too loud for the room. "We're practicing medicine here, not superstitions." Laughter didn't explode. It spilled in the way dirty water leaks under a door. A guard chuckled and glanced at another to see if it was safe to laugh more. The nurse winced, said nothing. The janitor looked up and tucked the little leather notebook deeper into his pocket. "Move the cart," the doctor snapped. "God doesn't sanitize floors." He swung an arm. The cart rattled and clipped the wall. A plastic bottle toppled. The prayer book slid, slapped the linoleum, and opened. 2 pages lifting once in the air like something that still wanted to fly. The dying man's eyes fluttered. A line on his monitor fell flat for a beat, then stuttered back, thin and quiet. The janitor's hand went gently to the rail again, as if to steady not the bed but the moment. "Don't touch the patient," the doctor said. "That's an order." The nurse's mouth tightened. She looked to the officers. They looked to the doctor. A pair of inmates mopping their own section farther down the ward stood watching. Mops halted, silent as posts in weather. Cruelty, when it begins, looks like permission. It borrowed that room in a heartbeat. It sat in the plastic chairs and leaned in the doorway. It pulled at the corners of mouths until smirks became grins. A joke grew legs. Laughter made it taller. "Move," the doctor repeated, and because no one stopped him, he shoved the janitor back a step with 2 fingers in the chest. An insult chosen for its smallness. The janitor absorbed it like someone taking a measurement. They had no idea who he really was. His name was Elias Cole. He kept it on a stitched patch above his heart and on an old wallet that creaked when it folded. He kept many things, quiet and well-tended. Bristles swiveled clean after each pass, wheels oiled, handles tightened. He kept time, this corridor at dawn, that one after lunch, because time, like floors, will become dangerous if you don't mind it. Why he bowed his head was not a mystery to him. It was the only way he knew to place himself precisely where he stood. He had learned that as a boy at a church where the piano was always a little out of tune and people sang from memory. He had learned it again in a different uniform, where kneeling meant not surrender but steadiness, while your hands did work that could not be undone. There was a folded letter in his breast pocket. He carried it like men carry a photograph. The paper had thinned at the crease from being opened and opened again. It was from his son, Marcus, now 30, living 3 states away, who had written about a new job, a baby coming, and a memory of a day when Elias had taught him to set a tourniquet on a bike tire just to learn the motion. "You told me you practiced truth before the test," the letter said in his son's hand. "So when the test comes, you don't have to look for it." Elias sometimes whispered a verse when the air got too loud, not for magic, for order, for the clock inside him that needed a hand to point north. He whispered now, just enough to put weight on the right words. "Teach us to number our days," he said under his breath, the syllables a carpenter's pencil, marking where to cut the noise. He did not fight back because he had already chosen his fight. Rage would have set every instrument in the room off key. Discipline kept him inside the line he had drawn for himself years before, when he had watched a man bleed in his arms and learned that shouting seldom convinces blood to stay home. He could endure a shove. He would not endure a lie about who mattered. The letter warmed his pocket. He touched it once, like a man checking a watch he trusted. The doctor didn't just double down. He built a little stage. He stood at the end of the bed and raised his voice to make sure the officers in the doorway could hear. "Nurse, patients don't need superstition. They need competent care," he said, eyes on Elias. "And competent staff, not janitorial chaplains." The word janitorial was not a job. In his mouth it was a rank. He flicked a glance to the camera in the corner and smiled just enough to be seen. He used his pen to tap the patient's wrist, impatient with the vein, impatient with the man. He rolled his eyes as if the heart monitor were a rude child. Then he stepped around the bed and shouldered the cart once more harder. A bottle skidded across the floor, hit the baseboard, spun and lay ringing. An officer laughed in a single bark. The other didn't. She shifted, weight to the heel, eyes narrowed. "Sir," Elias said quietly to the nurse, so no one else had to hear the warning in it, "check the oxygen." The nurse looked. The cannula line had a lazy kink in it where plastic meets stubborn corners. She reached to smooth it. The doctor's hand slapped hers away. "I said I have it," he snapped. Elias took his hand from the rail. He could feel the urge rising in the room, the way hunger rises at the sight of the first plate. Insult is contagious. It wants witnesses. He had learned in other rooms that someone must stand very still or the whole place will start to shake. "Back off," the doctor said, and planted his palm in Elias's shoulder, pushing him until the cart pinched his hip against the wall. The nurse inhaled through her teeth. The officers' radios chittered and fell quiet. The dying man's chest tugged shallow. The monitor chirped, faltered, and drew itself into a thin line that looked a lot like distance. Someone swore softly. Elias bowed his head. He let the silence reach him the way a craftsman lets wood speak. He unclenched what didn't matter and held fast to what did. He steadied the swaying bottle with a fingertip. He set the prayer book back on the cart and smoothed it like a shirt you mean to wear with dignity. He prayed the simplest prayer he knew. What broke the moment wasn't a shout. It was attention correctly placed. From where he stood, Elias could see the tubing had walked itself out of the socket by a fraction, the kind of fraction that matters. He could see the nurse see it too and hesitate, as if afraid to reach past the white coat to do what needed doing. "Now," Elias said, not loud, but with the peculiar authority of a person who has said now before in rooms where seconds were coins. The nurse moved. Her hand followed the line, smoothed the kink, seated the connection. Air found air. The patient's chest took a breath that sounded different, less like a rattle in a jar, more like a person in a bed. A heartbeat, electrical and fragile, found the monitor's ear. Beep, beep, beep. Everyone heard it. You could feel the sound land in the room and change its weight. The old man's eyelids fluttered. Color rose a half shade above bone. The doctor stood very still, hands still lifted from where he'd swatted. Silence didn't accuse him. It just told the truth out loud. The first officer cleared his throat. Doc?" The nurse, her voice professional and steady, said, "Saturation's coming back. He's perfusing." Elias pulled the red cord on the wall. Code protocol did not require panic. It required a call. He pressed the button so the intercom would catch his words. "Code assist, Ward 3, he said. "Respiratory compromised, regained, monitor reestablished." The intercom clicked. A second voice, flat, official, the warden's clerk, replied with a phrase that made heads turn. "Acknowledged. Mr. Cole, led until on-call arrives." Whispers ran like mice. The doctor's eyes cut to Elias. "Lid?" he said, half laugh, half warning. The nurse was already moving with Elias's words. "You heard the desk," she said, pinching the bridge of the cannula, checking the clamps, adjusting the bed's head. Elias counted aloud the way one counts to set tempo. "Secure, clear, breathe," he said, and the room obeyed because cadence is a kind of gravity. 2 additional staff hustled in, a PA with Winter still clinging to his coat and a respiratory therapist who knew Elias well enough to nod without surprise. "Cole," she said, "you see it before I did." "Only because I was looking for it," he said. The loudspeaker crackled again. Not the clerk this time, the warden himself. "Dr. Havel, stand down," he said. Mr. Cole authored our emergency line check protocol and trains new staff on it. He has current BLS instructor certification on file. He is empowered to direct immediate life support measures prior to clinician arrival. That is a warden's order. There it was, the document's voice, amplified. Not a secret status, not a magic badge, just the authority of competence long practiced and quietly recorded, now read aloud in a room that had tried to pretend it didn't exist. The doctor swallowed. Pride looked for an exit and found none with dignity. Eyes widened, voices died, shame fell heavy, first on the floor like spilled fluid, then on shoulders, then on the soft parts of the face where it shows as a pink rising from the collar. The camera in the corner watched a room remember itself. The inmate in the bed took another breath. The monitor kept time. And Elias, who had not stepped forward to be seen, but only to do the next right thing in reach, set his palm back on the rail, a sentry keeping the gate between panic and order. Seconds later, they learned who he really was. Justice didn't arrive as a march. It came as paperwork and policy, which is how justice lasts in places built from rules. By late afternoon, a disciplinary order waited in the doctor's inbox with the ink still damp. The language was dry and rectangular. Pending review of conduct unbecoming, failure to follow established respiratory line check protocol, harassment of staff. The warden's signature stalked the bottom like a heavy animal. For 1 month, the doctor would be off the ward, then back under supervision. He could keep his title. Titles were cheap. Trust would be expensive. Word traveled the yard the way heat travels metal. Some men grinned too wide, hungry for a fall. Elias didn't feed that hunger. When he wheeled his cart past the gatehouse, he stopped where the officers kept their paper cups and poured hot water for the nurse who had hesitated, then helped. He didn't say, "You did right." He said, "Thank you," which is the same sentence when spoken honestly. The first officer, the one who had barked a laugh, found him by the supply closet. The man's face had a look usually reserved for apologies said to children. "Mr. Cole," he began, and stopped, then started again. "Sir?" Elias accepted the word because it wasn't for him alone. It was a word returning to its proper home, the place people put it when they recognize skill and steadiness and decide to call it by its right name. 2 inmates mopping their own tear crossed him later, and each, without looking directly, made the smallest nod. Not the nod men trade when they think they're clever. The other nod, the one that says, "You held the line when it mattered." "We saw you." Near evening, the doctor came, stripped of his coat, a visitor's badge clipped where the expensive fabric used to hang. He stood where reprimanded men stand, near but not too close, throat working against words that didn't enjoy this kind of duty. "I misjudged you," he said. Elias kept his eyes soft, firm. "You misjudged the room," he replied. "It holds more people than you counted." He gestured slightly, toward the bed, toward the nurse, toward the officers, toward the camera, toward the old man whose chest still rose and fell like a tired tide. "It remembers." The doctor nodded. He had always been good at speed. Maybe now he would learn accuracy. "Will you?" the doctor began, then halted on the pride that still guarded a last gate. "Will you review the protocol with me?" "Of course," Elias said, and meant it. Justice is rarely complete without mercy. Mercy, to be worth anything, teaches. He fetched the laminated sheet from the wall pocket, the one he had typed on a sticky keyboard 2 winters ago when nobody was watching, and held it beside the equipment as if it were a map and not a rebuke. They stood side by side, a white coat folded on a chair and a gray shirt tucked into work pants, and went through the steps like 2 men learning a hymn by heart. The balance resettled, quietly, like dust after light returns. Let me tell you this, the way old men tell it when the day is run down to a thin blue edge and the lights no longer bully the room. Respect isn't fear, and it isn't loud. It doesn't wear a badge like a crown or ride a siren like a victory parade. Respect is a habit, stacked into a life 1 square at a time, the way you keep your hands steady when the room wobbles, the way you look to the line before you cut, the way you speak to the person who can't pay you back, and the way you keep your voice low so the work can be loud. Justice is not a crash of cymbals. Most days it's a hinge, quiet, oiled, reliable, swinging the same way for everyone. Paperwork is part of it. So are signatures, training memos, and the calls that come over the loudspeaker with just enough authority to make a proud man stand down. But deeper than all that is the reckoning that happens inside a person who thought power meant he could humiliate another human being, and learned for once that power is not a spotlight, but a responsibility with a heartbeat. They mocked a man for praying by a dying man's bed. They thought they were shaming him. What they did, without meaning to, was throw a cloth over their own heads. They forgot the room counts everyone: the patient, the nurse, the officer who pretended to laugh, the officer who refused, the little red camera, the clerk with the clear voice, the warden reading plain words into a microphone, and the janitor whose hands had more years of competence in them than the rest of them combined. The monitor beeped again. A life did its stubborn work of returning, and in that sound the room remembered its center. The joke died the way small things die when big truths step through the door. If you want to carry something away from that ward, carry this. Respect isn't fear. It's what you do when no one's watching. Justice isn't loud. It's the quiet hand that steadies the world. When the shift ended, Elias wheeled his cart down a corridor that glowed a kinder shade of white. Sunlight, modest and late, pushed through the high windows and found the metal in narrow stripes. Somewhere a hymn, thin as thread, threaded itself through the vents. Maybe a nurse humming, maybe a memory, doing what memory does best. He paused at the threshold and looked back. The old man slept the way grateful things sleep. The nurse wrote her notes with the care of someone who understands notes get read by people who weren't in the room. The doctor, without his coat, checked a line and checked it again. Elias touched the letter in his pocket, then the laminated sheet on the wall. He set his palm to the rail one last time, not to claim ownership, but to bless an object that had stood between breath and emptiness, and for a few quiet seconds held. He rolled on. The mop head drank a last ribbon of water from the floor, and the tracks it left behind shone like something polished ceremony no one needed to announce. The door at the end of the hall opened on hinges he had oiled himself. It did not trumpet. It simply swung true. Outside, light arranged itself between bars as if to teach them a better geometry. Somewhere, a child would be born to a son who remembered a father's hands. Somewhere, a policy would be read by a new hire and taken seriously because a story had taught it weight. And in a hospital ward inside a prison where men sometimes forget the shape of their own names, a room learned, for a while at least, to say sir to the right things.